Welcome to the Syneos Health Podcast, Conversations on Commercialization. I'm Tyler Cowan, Vice President of Syneos Health. In this series, we explore the strategies and innovations shaping healthcare today and tomorrow. This episode was recorded at the Fierce Pharma Week in Philadelphia, right in the heart of the action. Let's dive in. I'm here with Ruta Shah, who is the Senior Engagement Manager for Syneos Consulting. We're here doing another podcast from the Fierce Pharma event in Philadelphia. Welcome, Ruta.
Thanks, Tyler, for having me. I'm excited to be here and talking to you.
Your experience specifically, especially in the consulting side of the business, such a dynamic element of not just our business, but also about the healthcare space in general. And one of the things that you've been working in a lot is the area of obesity. And through earlier discussions that you and I have had, you'd mentioned to me some of the work that you're doing with clients, informing strategy and differentiation within clinical trials, from clinical trials forward. Can you speak a little bit of what you've been working on in this very exciting, very dynamic, and really quite a noisy area of healthcare lately?
Thanks, Tyler. Just like AI, obesity and GLP-1s have become our daily buzzword. If I had $1 for every time it came up, we'd be having a very different conversation. Seriously, I think that it's finally been getting the attention that it deserves. Honestly, GLP-1s have been around since the mid-2000s. I want to say when you had exenatide, liraglutide, of course, for diabetes. But their big entry into obesity has been the game changer. I like to think that it's been a perfect storm of clinical breakthroughs. There's been a cultural shift, and there have been economic forces largely driven by these two giant pharmas that you have. What's unique here is really how tangible the results are in obesity, right? Patients can see very visible, real results, and that's fueling demand. And not to mention that celebrities and influencers had a nice touch when we're talking about that. So keeping up with the momentum, Syneos has established this metabolic center of excellence. And within that, our focus has really been about understanding the obesity landscape more. That's where, as you mentioned, we've been working with companies as broader Syneos to help them understand defined strategy and differentiation. One of the key shift that we've been seeing is that the unmet need is no longer just about weight loss. Because what we have available right now with the two major drugs, they've done a pretty good job. But now it's more about quality of weight loss. Physicians are asking, are patients losing fat or muscle?
Right. We're hearing a lot about that lately around not just the loss of weight, but where that weight's coming from. And is some of that weight actually muscle mass, and some of the concerns around that is being potentially a negative side effect to some of this space?
Absolutely, yeah. They're asking, is the weight loss well distributed? Is it sustained? How severe is the nausea, the GI side effects? So there's more that physicians and patients are looking for. Beyond that, it's also working with the clients to understand the pipeline better. The market is going to look very different in the next few years than it does right now. So really helping understand what that future launch environment is going to be, what the expectations are going to be from a new therapy. The pipeline is buzzing. It's crowded, to say the least. You have your oral GLP-1s that may not be as effective, but they are offering a needle-free alternative. You have companies that are exploring flexible dosing to deal with challenges associated with titration, with the plateauing effects. We are seeing all kinds of novel mechanisms. Of course, you have your dual agonists, but then you have the triple G, as it's called. You have clinical pathways that are exploring different combinations with GLP-1s. How can you stack them together? How can you maybe even sequence them with the different drugs that are offering different benefits? So you have drugs trying to show more holistic effects, reduction in visceral fat, muscle sparing, improvement in liver and metabolic health. Wegovy, as you know, became the first GLP-1 to be approved for MASH. And Zepbound already has additional indications for sleep apnea. There's a much more holistic approach in play that's reshaping obesity as we think of it as a systemic disease.
I love that. And it was fascinating. Just a comment from my side. I met with Mark Bard from the Digital Health Consortium this morning, and we were talking about how you now have a disease state, let's call it a disease state for the purposes of this discussion, in obesity, where a healthcare provider, so the actual patient's physician, can be completely removed from the entire treatment and the patient journey. So you have situations where, I'll use a gentleman for the sake of the example, a gentleman shows up to an annual physical, they've lost, let's say, 30 pounds, and the doctor says, wow, you look great. And he says, well, I've been on a GLP-1 that I got through insert name of company here. So now you have the HCP is actually no longer in the loop of their healthcare, which is something that could have never happened before. And that's really changing the dynamic. As you said, the area and the market is going to look very different over the next few years, certainly.
You triggered a thought because it's what I've been thinking about too. The stakeholder dynamics are shifting so much too. It's no longer about the traditional physicians, patients, and payers. It hasn't been for a while. But now you have your, like you said, the telehealth providers who may make the physician so removed from the journey. There's a whole ecosystem now that you need to cater to. You also have these large employers that are pretty much self-insured. They have this big set of employees, their risk pool, and they are making major critical coverage decisions. They are deciding whether they mandate their employees go on a health program or a weight loss program before they cover GLP-1s, for example. You have your benefit consultants that could influence access. You look at your Lilly and Novo's websites, they have a page and resources dedicated to large employers now. There's just a lot happening in this space that goes beyond the traditional promotion and the traditional strategy. And all this is to say is that there is a new frontier to launch strategy and launch planning for any company that's really looking to launch into this market. I like to often say there's this race between all of these companies. It's about getting the new next GLP-1 or leveraging this halo of that GLP-1s have created. And everyone's trying to carve out a niche for themselves.
It's an exciting space because what started out as a way to tackle diabetes that then turned into a way to tackle weight, the GLP-1 specifically was sort of more tailored, let's say, to, I don't want to say vanity, but the health risk. And it was really kind of focused around just pure weight loss. And now we're seeing reductions in hypertension, where people move out of pre-diabetes back to a more steady state of health due to weight loss. So there are some huge benefits to this class. It'll just be fascinating to see how things, as you say, as companies look to launch into this sort of new frontier of medicines around this space. So we did touch on this a little bit. We've all seen considerable consumer advertising in this space. Obviously, you have a much deeper reservoir to pull from here, but we're talking about insurance, we're talking about payers, we're talking about private organizations that effectively drive their own formularies for products. Like you said, hey, they have to go through lifestyle changes. And then you have the whole element of cash payers that are actually excluded from the entire continuum, and they're almost in their own ecosystem. So what do you see on the frontier of the GLP-1s working so closely with this in obesity around these different payer groups and the direct-to-patient and direct-to-consumer advertising?
You're right. This market has been incredibly driven by DTC, by advertising, but there's a lot of noise. Patients and advocates now are saying they want more substance. It's not just about the aspirational messaging about what looks the most appealing. It's more about real, relevant information. Today's patient is well-read. They come into the physician's office with information, with questions in their head. They want to be part of the choice. And DTC advertising needs to evolve to meet that. I don't want to dismiss it completely. I think it's there. But there is a pretty significant opportunity to evolve, to enhance, and to have a lot more focused targeting messages that delivers the patient the information they need.
Absolutely. And we are seeing some change even very recently around legislation around DTC advertising.
Absolutely. The impact of the administration, they've come down pretty strongly on DTC pharma ads. They announced just recently a quote-unquote crackdown, if you will, on pharma ads. They're going to require these ads to go through a whole new compliance. And rightly so. This is delivering patients with information directly, and it's fair to have them hold up to different compliance standards. How substantive it's going to be legally, regulatory, we'll wait to see. But there's no denying that it's going to have a major impact.
I wonder how much of that is driven by what you just mentioned a moment ago, where patients are more informed and they're not just taking surface level, hey, I want to lose weight, or hey, this GLP-1 my friend said was good. They want to understand why they're taking it, what the differences are between these products. I know you have quite a bit of experience with Syneos Consulting around how do you differentiate these medications as you come into, as you said, a very noisy space.
I was just going to add that We talked about DTC advertising.
We did.
But there is a whole other aspect to DTC now, that it's no longer just about promotion. The whole term has become much broader than that. It's become more about access and convenience as well. To talk about what you were referring to, the direct-to-patient platforms. Sure. You see that with the Lilly Direct and NovoCare, the platforms that are delivering medications directly to patients at half the price. These are more talked about, but it's not just unique to this space. Pfizer jumped on the bandwagon with Pfizer for All. With a similar model, they integrated telehealth. They've partnered with Instacart to deliver. So there's just a lot of innovation happening in this space. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say the telehealth and the direct-to-patient platforms, of course, they were also big with the compounding and when we ran into shortage issues. But they've established a strong model, almost a precedence that seems to be working well, and that every new company is going to have to think about now.
Absolutely. And certainly AWS and Amazon.
Yeah.
If you're anything like my house, they're already coming almost every day anyway.
Yes. Of course, these patients are targeting, like you said, the cash paying or uninsured customers. But with more and more drugs that are expected to enter the market, payers and employers are likely going to become more restrictive in what they cover. Actually, recently there was an ICER report that was published, and that found the GLP-1s to be highly cost-effective. But because of their price point and because of the increasing prevalence of obesity, they said that there are about only just 1% of eligible patients that can be covered or reimbursed before they hit the budget threshold.
Wow.
I won't go into the questions regarding the soundness of ICER's approach, but there's no denying that these statistics are pretty compelling. You know, all the groups, the payers, the employers, they are all feeling significant cost pressures. They are going to definitely institute more restrictions with the uptick in the utilization of these medications. And that's going to likely open the doors for patients who are motivated and who have the resources to go to alternative platforms like DTC. That's driving a lot of innovation in this space.
It's fascinating to see it unfold in real time. And I've certainly been in this business for decades. It's amazing how fast some of these are coming together. The last piece that I wanted to touch on is actually around the word obesity. And I find this part of the discussion fascinating. And there's a number of different examples. When you hear the word obesity, there's images or word associations that come along with it. And we're talking about loss of the right type of weight. Someone losing weight, but where's the weight coming from? How much of it is visceral fat, the sort of quote unquote bad fat? How much of it may be muscle? How do we avoid losing muscle while still losing the visceral fat that we know has a negative impact on comorbidities and all cause comorbidities? So when you think about BMI or obesity, how is the market changing around what that weight means and how are doctors truly assessing, okay, you got on the scale and you've lost 20 pounds, but 20 pounds from where?
It's a great question. And there is a real shift happening in how we talk about obesity, how we measure health. The term itself, exactly like you said, it carries a lot of stigma even now. Too often, obesity has been seen as a failure of willpower. Even now, there is a significant faction that thinks that it's all about better diet or better lifestyle, but it's far more complex than that. Just think about how we evolved our understanding of liver disease. Right? We were talking about it earlier, from non-alcoholic disease to metabolic or MASH.
And the stigma associated with anything associated with alcoholic.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's that mindset shift. And in fact, Novo Nordisk's campaign, when they did the whole rethink obesity, I think that was genius marketing. It did a great job of establishing obesity as a disease.
As a metabolic disease.
As a metabolic disease. We've seen literature around the usage of the term ABCD. I was mentioning it to you earlier. It's adiposity-based chronic disease. It reframes obesity as a chronic, complication-centric condition and not just a number on a scale. My opinion is that there will be a formal move towards rephrasing obesity to be called something else, possibly ABCD.
And just reframing how we think about it as a disease instead of a stigmatized, as you said, lack of willpower or a failing on the patient's behalf, when really there's a ton of reasons that are all feeding into a net result that perhaps is undesirable.
Absolutely. It'd be interesting if it's called ABCD.
Right. I won't be able to remember what those letters stand for, and I can't say that 3 times fast, but it will work.
If it happens, we'll just say you heard it first here.
Yeah, that's right.
If it doesn't, I'll just say I was only joking.
Absolutely.
I did want to address your question around BMI. BMI is becoming increasingly seen as outdated. It does not account for additional considerations like fat distribution, muscle mass, water retention, or just even overall metabolic health. So physicians are now starting to think about it more as body composition, body fat percentage. There's another terminology that I've mentioned before. It's called BRI, it's Body Roundness Index. And that takes into factor your waist circumference, which is a critical indicator of obesity, of metabolic health.
And that's that visceral fat that is the
Exactly.
really very much the unwanted and unhealthy fat deposits you don't want.
Absolutely. It's a BRI. So it's not yet widely used, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what we start moving towards. We have been encouraging customers, clients, companies to think about how to demonstrate the value of their drug and make a compelling case. There is still a clear need. Like I said, it's a race. Everybody is trying to figure out how to make their drug the next therapy of choice. And it all boils down to how differentiated you are, what value you can drive. It's also interesting because obesity is a pretty well-known risk factor for many other conditions.
With 2 comorbidities, absolutely.
Right. Exactly. We know about diabetes and cardiovascular disease, but there was a study that was published that showed that patients who were on GLP-1s showed a 20% lower risk of cancer.
No kidding.
So the question is now that, is there anything that GLP-1s cannot do?
Right.
So it's going to really be like, how can companies that are launching into the space, how are they going to compete with that level of benefit, and how can they differentiate themselves?
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. Within this discussion around obesity, BMI, BRI, and the GLP-1s, you are seeing also a considerable amount of discussion around intermittent fasting. And even from my own investigations and actually exercising it, I know that there's elements of autophagy, which they talk about how this certain point when you go without food, that the body in fact goes after the cells that are maybe broken or in disrepair and fix them. When I hear about reductions in cancer and things like that, I wonder what other mechanics are going on inside the body that are perhaps already there that is a byproduct of some of the different eating habits. It's a fascinating space, to your point, and it's not one that I think is shrinking anytime soon.
Absolutely. It's not going anywhere.
Thank you so much, Maria. This has been fantastic, and I would love to talk to you another time if you'll allow me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap on this episode of Conversations on Commercialization. Catch the rest of the series and subscribe to the Syneos Health podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you have other topics you would like to hear from us about, send a message to podcasts@syneoshealth.com. For more future-focused, actionable life science insights, visit Syneos Health Insights Hub at insightshub.health.